Welcome to Difficult Conversations, a webinar on how to have the difficult conversations in your classroom. One of the skills educators are encouraged to teach their children is the ability to take what they have learned in the classroom and apply it to the real world. Inevitably, the events of the real world become such hot topics that we as educators are forced to address them in class. And while some of those topics are fun and lighthearted, many reflect some of the issues we continue to struggle with as a society, including politics, race, and religion. Having such conversations can be difficult because they often trigger who we are at the core of our very beings. And although tough, gritty, and raw, these conversations still need to be had. This webinar will provide educators with 10 research techniques for those moments when the difficult conversations just have to be had. The research techniques on how to lead difficult conversations in the classroom are as follows. 1. Understand how your own implicit biases may influence the conversation. 2. Establish a safe space by leading with the goal and/or objective in mind. 3. Prepare classroom expectations and norms. 4. Do as much pre-planning as possible. 5. Be honest. 6. Actively facilitate the classroom discussion. 7. Provide frequent opportunities for reflection. 8. Know when to cut the difficult conversation short. 9. Share as many resources with students as possible. And 10, ensure you allow ample time at the end of the conversation to allow students to process their feelings. One of the first steps in leading difficult conversations within your classroom is to understand your own implicit biases. An implicit bias is when we have an attitude towards people or associate stereotypes to them without our conscious knowledge. Implicit biases are important because it influences how teachers respond to student behavior. As we all know, how teachers respond to students has a lasting impact on educational access and academic achievement. Once you have recognized what your own implicit biases are, you can work towards minimizing them, including placing yourself in the shoes of others and to stop using all language based on stereotypes. There are two resources included in this presentation. The first is Project Implicit from Harvard University. Project Implicit has created a series of tests that will help you identify any hidden biases. The next resource is an article from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement on how to reduce implicit bias. To ease the facilitation of hard and difficult conversations in the classroom, it is paramount to create a safe space. Safe spaces provide an outlet and an opportunity for all students to learn. You can create a safe space by following these four easy steps. 1. Allow there to be some reciprocity in the relationship between the students and the teacher, meaning it is okay to give your students a little insight into who you are. What are your goals? Do you have pets? Describe a time when you were unsuccessful. Students feel more comfortable with opening up and sharing when you have already done so. Next, you can provide your students with a voice in your classroom by practicing active listening skills. You and your students should practice active listening by paying attention, making eye contact with the speaker, and responding appropriately, including repeating key phrases and statements back to the speaker. Third, consistency and routines can provide students with feelings of safety. Organization and order provide a structure that most students embrace. Note, consistency must apply to how rules are enforced. Students feel safest when the classroom rules are enforced with equity. Last, as classroom teachers, we must remember to celebrate student successes and failures. We all make mistakes and must learn how to learn from them. Nothing beats a try but a failure. It is our job to encourage students to take risks while providing a safe environment to do so. Establishing classroom expectations norms, and ground rules for difficult conversations are key because it makes sure that the student voices are acknowledged, valued, and respected. It also lays the groundwork that will make it possible for all students to engage in the discussion and operate from a place of common understanding. Some rules to include are everyone gets a chance to speak. In order to make this happen, you may need to place time restrictions on student comments. Also, be cautious of students who monopolize the conversation. One way to address this is to make students like, let's hear from someone else in the room. Next, no interrupting. Students should listen respectfully and wait for the appropriate time to speak. Also, ask that students commit to learning and not to engage in debate. The discussion should be centered around comprehension of ideas and learning. And last, absolutely no inflammatory, derogatory, or vulgar language during the course of the conversation. You may find instructional tools like discussion stems and language frames helpful to students, allowing them to organize their thoughts and conduct a civil discussion. If possible, do as much pre planning for a difficult classroom conversation as you are able. Understandably, there are some events that may require your immediate attention, but if you can, take a moment to plan. Winging a conversation is not recommended as it can lead to the spread of misinformation and feelings of frustration on behalf of the students and yourself. There are three approaches that have been suggested by Mind Tools when planning for a tough conversation. First, plan for possible reactions and responses. The relationship you have previously built with your students will help you anticipate their possible reactions and allow you to plan appropriate response. Next, ensure that your classroom reflects a safe and comforting environment. You may even consider changing the setup of your classroom seating to better facilitate conversation. And last, choose a good time to hold the conversation. Try not to pick a time when emotions and feelings are extremely raw, but you also do not want to wait so long that the students have forgotten key information or the conversation no longer seems timely. As with many aspects of life, it is important to be open and honest during the more difficult classroom conversations. The issue of honesty is twofold. First, being honest when you feel vulnerable, excited, or even when you lack knowledge about a topic will lead your students to feelings of trust, empathy, and a willingness to support others. Be careful as to not be brutally honest with them, however. According to Psychology Today, students and even adults perceive brutal honesty as petty, overly critical, and as a personal attack. Second, as lovers of history, it is our job to lay out issues and events as they are. Educators have a responsibility to present the information truthfully and without bias. As the classroom teacher, it is your job to fulfill the role of facilitator during tough conversations. Those difficult conversations are hard in any arena, but educators are vital to ensuring that those difficult topics discussed run smoothly. You can become an expert at facilitating difficult conversations by following a few simple steps. Remember first to manage your emotions. According to Berkeley University Health Systems, the overall goal should be in supporting your students through the discussion. If you become reactive, you are then unable to help your students navigate those topics in their own feelings. Next, this should go without saying, but teachers, please be mindful of your language. During difficult conversations, there are buzzwords that may offend or elicit strong reactions from your students. Be intentional and purposeful with your word choice. Please also remember that your words as a teacher carry a lot of weight. Sharing your views at times could conflict with views of your students and unintentionally suppress student voice for fear of being in conflict with the teacher. Another key step in facilitating difficult conversations is to avoid blame. It is important to discuss how people feel as a response to an event, but it is not necessary to ascribe blame to any particular person or group of people. Also, Often during tough conversations, you may encounter moments of silence. I encourage you to not try to fill the silence with small talk or forced questions. Allow your students reasonable time to reflect and prepare their own thoughts as it pertains to the conversation. This rule also applies to students who may be trying to find the right words and have paused for a moment. Be cautious to not cut your students off or finish their thoughts for them. Last, I encourage educators to use prompts and questions to actively facilitate classroom discussions. Prompts and questions can assist in maintaining a free flowing and fruitful discussion. Promote internal reflections by students and steer the conversation in a different direction during unhealthy or unproductive conflict. Many of us often underestimate the importance of taking breaks as we toil through our own normal lives each day. When students are engaged in a tough conversation, it becomes extremely important for the teacher and or facilitator to provide frequent opportunities for a discussion break. These breaks enable students to decompress, calm their emotions, center themselves, and refocus on the merits of the discussion. Some examples of effective break activities include standing up and stretching, getting a quick drink of water, and doodling on a piece of paper. Even with all the best planning and facilitation skills, sometimes a classroom conversation reaches a point where it cannot go any further. This could happen for a variety of reasons, and if it does, you should be aware of some of the telltale signals that will let you know that the difficult conversation has reached its conclusion. Extended silence is one of the first signs to end the talk. As stated previously, silence can be a good technique to use during tough conversations because it can lead students to self reflection. Extended silence, however, even after you have introduced prompts and questions into the conversation, will let you know that your students have exhausted their talking points and the discussion is over. Repetitive comments or statements will also alert the classroom teacher that the class conversation may be nearing its end. When talking points have become belabored and no new information is being introduced, students are no longer receiving any educational benefits or in an academic rich setting. Next, once you see them, nonverbal cues tend to be a clear signal that your students are done with this conversation. These nonverbal cues include fidgeting with clothes, hands, or items on the desk, picking up and looking at cellular phones, lack of eye contact or focus on the speaker, and packing up their belongings before the end of class. Last is verbal cues. If you hear multiple students making statements asking to end the conversation, listen to them and end the conversation. One of the instructional practices that social studies educators always excel in is the use of primary and secondary source documents as a resource to help support and supplement classroom activities. When choosing to engage in difficult conversations as a part of the day's lesson, it is a must that educators provide related resources for students. Indiana University's Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning states the following: students need assistance with processing difficult conversations. In addition to providing students with text information, videos, and websites that explain both sides of the issue, also consider giving students resources that support their emotional and psychological needs. You have made it through the tough conversation in your classroom. Now what? Don't forget to provide your students with an opportunity to process the conversation. Referencing Indiana University Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning once again, it is important that you allow students to synthesize everything that was discussed and be able to relate it back to the lesson's objective. Remember, synthesis is a high level Bloom's taxonomy verb. Teachers, you should ask your students what they would have liked to have done differently during the course of the conversation. This can be done as a whole group or individual activity and is great as an exit ticket. Additionally, you may want to consider giving students an extension activity. The extension activity not only allows for student synthesis and reflection, but it also gives you the opportunity to see how well received the classroom discussion was and if students met the lesson objective. Thank you for completing the Difficult Conversations webinar. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact Ebony McKeever, Social Studies Education Specialist with the Nebraska Department of Education, using the information at the bottom of the slide.